Hello, I'm Bubs, I'm an artist, and I like to hear myself talk, and I've been doing all of those things on social media for a good long while now. In fact, while not always under the handle Bubs, I've spent much of my life as a part of the online art community, both as a passive observer and an active creator, and I believe in its ability to educate, inspire, and encourage people that are pursuing art in all its wonderful forms. I've experienced it myself, and I see it happen all the time still. As much beauty as there is, though, I also know that it's not a perfect place. Social media really is great for artists in a lot of ways, but super terrible in others, and misinformation is one of the biggest ways. There is just so much bad advice and misinformation out there, and it can reach thousands, maybe even millions of people at a time. Don't get me wrong, I am a staunch defender of the idea that what makes for good or bad art is subjective, and not all art needs to be quote-unquote good art to have value. But I also know that there are some objective factors that are involved with making art, such as the art fundamentals or concepts like color theory. These objective techniques and concepts are important for an artist to know about and understand, even if they intend on breaking the rules. After all, if there were no such objectivity in art, there would be no critique, no improvement, no development. One such objective technique/concept that I have seen completely misunderstood lately, and the subject of today's video, is character design. Considering that it is my favorite thing to think about and talk about and do within my artistic endeavors, it bothers me quite a bit that the majority of the internet seems to have no understanding of what character design even is, and, if I may, I'd like to complain about that for a while. Hopefully this video can act as a counter-narrative to what I see spread around so much nowadays, or at the very least, act as some simple entertainment or background noise for you while you draw, or crochet, or fold your laundry, or whatever. Hey, maybe you'll learn something along the way too. Quick disclaimer that I do not purport to be an absolute authority on art, nor an infallible character designer, and while I consider myself well-informed on this topic, and well-researched for this video specifically, I may get some things wrong, and I invite some friendly corrections in my comments. My goal is to stop the spread of misinformation, not generate more of it. I also want to state very clearly that my intention isn't to call you stupid or shame you if you believe one of the things I'm about to tell you is wrong. You are not stupid or shameful for agreeing with a common consensus of little consequence to the world at large. I hope that will come across in how I handle my criticisms, but it can't hurt to frame the video like this too. I also want to be super duper clear that I'm specifically here to talk about character design that is serving a purpose other than an artist having fun. This is why you will notice me talking about forums for sharing opinions, trends, or officially published works that have a lot to do with internet culture, rather than using specific individual creators as an example. Not everything has to be well thought out and super polished in order for it to be valid as a creation or worth putting out onto the internet, so I'm not going to hold random accounts posting fun things to a professional standard. I think we need to make more room for people just having fun, honestly, but I digress. Alright, let's finally address the most important thing for this video. What is character design? Huh? The term character design is a bit of a tricky one. Just like the word art itself, the term is used to refer to both a process and the result of said process. In other words, we could be talking about the philosophy, intentions, brainstorming, revision, and so on involved in putting together the appearance of a character, or the actual appearance of the character. To be very clear, when I say the internet doesn't know what character design is, I'm referring to a misunderstanding of the process and how one should go about it, not the actual end product. Obviously, you can get a lot of insight into the process by looking at the end product, which I will be using as a means of discussion, but the end product is that more subjective part. The next logical question, then, for you, would be, what is the correct way to go about character design? Good job if you're asking that. If you asked social media, you might get the impression that as long as your design is aesthetically pleasing, it's doing its job. While not completely wrong, depending on context, I think this idea results in most of the problems I see with how the internet at large talks about and handles character design. I'll set the record straight by saying that the goal of a character design is not just looking nice or being interesting, but rather providing some effective visual storytelling. At the end of the day, That is all a character design is. If you strip down all of the schools of thought and remove all the important ideas like silhouette and shape language, you are still left with the concept of visual storytelling. What story your character design is going to tell is up to you, as is how you are going to tell that story. But I should be able to figure out something about your character just by looking at them. Something about their occupation, their environment, their hobbies, their age, their species, their personality, their lifestyle, stuff like that. If you want me to know something about this person right away, including if you are intentionally misleading me, I should be able to discern that from your design alone. The other basic thing that we need to get out of the way is effective. I used the word effective earlier, and I meant it. A good character design should not just tell me a story, but should do it as clearly and efficiently as you can manage within your style. In general, less is more in character design, because the more details you add, the less easy it will be to parse at a glance. This is not to say that a character that has a lot of details on them is automatically bad, but if I need to pay really close attention to every single little detail to understand what's going on, or there's a bunch of visual clutter that doesn't really help you understand this character, it's not as effective as a design that doesn't do that. So, takeaway here is that a good character design will A, tell me important information about your character, and B, tell me that important information as quickly and clearly as possible. That is the most bare-bones understanding that we can continue on with. I could now spend a bunch of time going into the nitty-gritty of shape language, color palettes, proportion, silhouette, and all that really fun stuff, but the sad thing is that the bare-bones stuff is what I see misunderstood the most often, so I don't really have to go into that for the sake of complaining. Besides, people that are much less purple in the prose department have already made great videos on those subjects. In fact, I'll make a little list of some videos that I really like for those curious of you if you want to learn more about character design, and I'm going to put that in my description. For here, though, it is time for me to start deconstructing some common misconceptions I see all the time, starting with the one that I despise the most. The idea that an ugly design is a bad design is probably one of the most common misconceptions, in addition to being the most annoying to me. I say one of the most common because I think this is the idea that is spread the farthest outside of the art space. It makes sense, of course, because a person that doesn't really understand much about actual design philosophy will be more likely to view what they like to look at as good and what they do not like to look at as bad. It's not even an illogical way to view character design, and there are even concepts in character design that are specifically about intrigue and appeal, that are worth bringing up. But that doesn't mean I'm happy that most worst character designs ever lists seem to only be comprised of designs that are ugly. They basically never include designs that don't make sense but still happen to look nice, but they often include designs that are actually incredibly effective, yet just so happen to be ugly. There are obviously times where a character design is ugly and bad, but they are not inherent to one another. After all, sometimes a character design is supposed to be ugly or otherwise off-putting to look at, because that is a part of their story for whatever reason. I have played lip service to this idea before in my Pokemon redesign videos, of all things. Sure, it's not technically exactly character design, but Pokemon design philosophy is the same in a lot of ways, so that will be our starting example. If you look up worst Pokemon designs right now and start looking through the lists, there are lots of mons that pop up that I agree are pretty awful, even if I personally disagree with a lot of the reasons that these Game Rant journalists or Redditors give for why the designs are bad. Still, there are some fantastic designs that effectively communicate the whole concept of the mon that get included simply because the Pokemon fandom at large doesn't like how it looks. The most commonly slandered one, in my opinion, happens to be Trubbish, and by extension Garbodor, though I will focus on just Trubbish because it's easier. I will be the first to acknowledge that I have Gen 5 bias, because Pokemon White was my first Pokemon game ever, and I will die on the hill that Gen 5 is one of the best generations in terms of design. But even if you aren't with me on that, which is fine, we need to stop acting like Trubbish has a bad design just because you dislike the concept of a living trash bag. You not liking the idea behind a design doesn't make the design inherently bad, just in the same way that you liking the idea doesn't make it inherently good. Even without the name, you would know right away what Trubbish is supposed to be, which is not something you can always say for some of the most popular and beloved designs out there. It is easily readable as a trash bag, including in silhouette. On top of that, while I don't think it's really ugly, if you think it is, that's great, because it's garbage. It is supposed to be gross and off-putting because garbage is gross and off-putting. Something I think is really important too is that you would be able to logically guess what its typing is based on its design. It's a trash bag, specifically a broken trash bag. It will have you thinking about waste spillage, sanitary risk, toxins, and diseases. Ergo, poison type. It makes sense. The whole design makes sense, and you can figure out its deal right away. You do not have to like Trubbish or its design in order to acknowledge that it succeeds in communicating what it's all about. Do not get me wrong, I am more than willing to entertain a discussion about whether a design created for commercial success is technically a failure if it doesn't sell. But that is a completely different judgment criteria than the fundamentals of character design philosophy. Case in point, the priority placed on whether or not something would make a cute plushie or a cool thing to put on a t-shirt or poster has seemingly caused a lot of indie creators to tone back what would otherwise be uncanny, ugly, or upsetting designs, to the detriment of storytelling. You see it in a lot of the romance world, actually, especially in webcomics nowadays. You get characters that are supposedly sickly or cursed or battle-worn, but still have perfect hair and perfect skin because they have to be hot enough to serve as the romantic lead, and God forbid you ask a person to get invested in a character that couldn't pass for a K-pop idol. Despite my sarcastic griping, it's fine to lead into beauty standards when you write a romance story because people like to read about hot people falling in love. But it is stupid to tell me that your romance story has someone that is not in line with conventional beauty standards when your visuals do not show me the same thing. The visual storytelling is out of line with the rest of the storytelling, and that is a bad thing. That mismatch between story and the visuals is the biggest problem with prioritizing aesthetics over everything. Modern-day mascot horror is basically the poster child of this problem. This genre really learned all the wrong lessons from the original Five Nights at Freddy's, including the rest of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, though maybe it's more about a fear of being boring over a fear of being ugly. It's a related concept. It still falls under people thinking that a good design is just something fun to look at, but you know what? You can consider this a subsection of the video if you want. Here, I'll even make a little transition for you. Okay. Others that have more investment in the horror genre have said it better than I'm about to, but there is a reason that the original FNAF animatronics work so well, whereas the newer ones have lost their bite. If you look at the evolution of the character design from the start of the FNAF series all the way to the Montgomery Gator himself, you can notice a gradual trend where the designs lose their subtlety. They start falling into one of two distinct categories, that being horror-first designs and marketability-first designs, and in my opinion, both of these categories suck. The originals worked so well because they were simple. If we look at clunky OG Freddy here, you can make the argument that this is a very boring design, at least compared to some of his other much cooler or much more upsetting designs that he gets throughout the series. You could also easily argue that this design, isolated from context, is not actually that scary. He is not nearly as scary as even his withered form, let alone his nightmare form. However, I believe that this is still the best incarnation of Freddy that we've ever gotten. Even if glam rock daddy Freddy's, he appeals to me, but for completely different reasons. His being boring was precisely what gave him the scare factor in the first place, and made the first game so unsettling. The game is set in an intentionally uncanny place. The usual bright, loud, and bustling environment of a children's party is now dark, quiet, and empty. The animatronics, who you would normally look up at as they danced in the flattering light of a stage, are now roaming the halls as you look down at them from grainy security cameras. Everything about this familiar world is off, and if they looked like they did in 4, it just wouldn't work the same. More importantly for today's discussion, though, the designs actually make sense in terms of visual storytelling. These Chuck E. Cheese knockoffs aren't so overtly horrifying that they feel out of place in what is supposed to be a children's party venue, but they also aren't so overtly cuddly and cute that they aren't threatening. I think that's what a lot of the bad examples of mascot horror get wrong, leaning too far one way or the other. You get things that are way too scary for any parent to realistically expose their child to, except for the guy who made them, actually. That is realistic, that totally makes sense. Or you have designs that are definitely cool for kids to be around, but end up not really feeling threatening because they are too sleek or cuddly for the horror game that they are running around in. Either way, some part of the story is going to suffer, and I don't think it's crazy to suggest that prioritization of market appeal is the reason. Both for the bigger, crazier monsters that look better in thumbnails, and goofier, cuter monsters that make for better plushies. I suppose that an argument could be made in certain circumstances that a design which is marketable to children is ideal, like in the case of Poppy Playtime. Considering that these designs are supposed to be popular with children in the context of the story, it would be pretty ridiculous to throw Pyramid Head down and act like that makes sense there. Still, as I mentioned with OG Freddy, it's not like you couldn't find a real-world counterpart of a kind of creepy 90s-era animatronic mascot. You could have done the same thing for a children's toy. I mean, these are all real-world children's products that would not have been crazy to take inspiration from, even if some of them were certainly more successful and beloved than others. Also, side note, I think that giving a cute creature big sharp teeth randomly is a lazy way to try and make a design scary, and it absolutely does not work for me, especially when, like the rest of the design, they are bright and polished. My rats have scarier teeth than this. My fingers survive at their mercy, and their mercy alone, and I know that. That was like a tangent, but I do not like designs like that, and I just want that on the record. My point with all this stuff is that sometimes good design is letting something be kind of ugly or kind of boring, because sometimes that makes the most sense. Not everything in the world is the coolest or prettiest or cutest or most exciting thing. If you put a beauty filter over everything just to up its appeal to your audience, you are going to take away from your storytelling and therefore the effectiveness of your character designs. A lot. This aesthetic over everything approach has another problem, though. It's not always just an unwillingness to let things be ugly or simple, but rather an insistence on adding more and more things to a design to the point where it ends up being horribly confusing to look at. Before I actually get into this, I wanted to let you know that it would actually be super chill and cool of you to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying my content so far. Doing stuff like that is free for you, but it helps out me and my channel a ton. Not only is it very appreciated, but it also makes it easier to continue dedicating time and energy to putting out stuff for you guys. Anywho, I have been seeing more and more videos pop up on my timeline of what I assume to be young artists quote-unquote redesigning a character, but this just consists of them adding more details to the character. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of this with Dandy's World characters, or at least I'm pretty sure that's what that is. I don't know, and I doubly do not know why my algorithm keeps giving it to me, but anyways, while this is ultimately harmless and probably falls into that category of people just having fun, I think it is more or less a symptom of a trend. A trend where people overstuff their character designs with details without seeming to consider what they're actually communicating to a viewer. I have already uttered the phrase less is more in this video, so I obviously disagree with the idea that more details automatically makes for a better design, but I want to talk about why. Character design, as I said before, is visual storytelling, and sometimes the story you're trying to tell might be pretty complicated. That, or maybe you just have a really detailed style. Either way, adding more to a design isn't a bad thing as long as those additions are actually serving a purpose. Sometimes your design needs a little extra shape to really balance things, or an extra spot of color to make it pop, or an added piece of clothing to make a theme more clear. Other times, adding on to something will only end up confusing your audience, either because you're distracting away from important information, or maybe even giving your audience conflicting information. I am finally going to be brave and do the thing that people hate you doing, and bring up Vivzy Pop's work as an example. I know, I know, it's been done to death. But it's unfortunately a really good case study, both in how large portions of the internet seem willing to call something good character design on the basis of it looking neat and nothing more, and in how a character design can be overly detailed. I am not here to be a blind hater. For the record, I followed the creator for ages when I was growing up, and was an avid watcher of both Hell of a Boss and Has Been Hotel for a while. I've since given up on her work for a plethora of reasons, but it's not like I don't understand the appeal of this media. I still like a lot of the songs, I even like some of the designs, but a lot of them are just so busy that I have no idea what's going on. There are lots of characters that I think this applies to, though I am going to pick on Husk only today, because in my opinion, he is the absolute worst offender. There is so much going on here, but none of it actually goes with his character at all. He is a washed-up gambler-type demon lord turned bartender, yet I'm looking at a fluffy kitty with angel wings and a bunch of random stripes and dots and love hearts all over him. I have read on his wiki page that his physical form is a punishment for him because he hates cats. So, like, as a part of his sentence in hell, he's gotta be a cat. I'm not sure that's a mechanic that was ever established to be a thing in the Helliverse aside from Husk, nor do I think that it was ever explicitly stated to be the case in the show. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, as I've not been keeping up with that show. But being a cat with suspender pants doesn't lead me to believe that you hate cats, or that you're a gambler or a bartender. And then you add in all these random-ass patterns and details to his design, and I'm still not getting these things. If I'm gonna be generous, which I can be, I can interpret that the red and black and white are all meant to be references to casino fare, roulette wheels, decks of cards, poker chips. Same deal with the love hearts. That's a suit in cards. I know cars. The problem is that the patterns don't feel specific enough to actually get across that vibe. At least not when you consider red, black, and white is basically the color palette for the entire cast. And the entire show in general, really. Basically, there's just not enough specific nods to these things for me to assume what's going on in a scenario where I didn't already know better. The same goes for the little love hearts. Since there are only hearts, I am not inclined to assume deck of cards, I'm inclined to assume cutesy heart detail. Husk actually used to have all the deck suits represented on his design, specifically along the interior feathers of his wings, but this was changed for the full show. I'm sure it was done to make animating them easier, but they actually look more busy to me in the final draft, and with less purpose, so I'm not sure why they didn't just make the wings red entirely, or opt for a striping pattern that was matching his eyebrows and tail fluff to bring a little cohesion to the design. Or, just fucking get rid of them. I wanted to be fair. I did some Googling to try and find a reason as to why this guy has wings, and, according to the actual fandom, the only known reason that this demon cat has a set of angel wings that completely break the meta of this world that prevents even bird demons from having wings is because he was originally designed by an 8-year-old over a decade ago. No, I am not kidding. Apparently, Husk's original design was created by Vivzy Pop's younger sister, who then gifted her the design, and from there, he was incorporated into the story and got his gambler design aspects and all that. That is a very sweet story, and I completely understand being sentimental about that sort of thing, but it is absolutely ridiculous to keep a story-breaking and design-cluttering detail around like that on your greenlit Amazon Prime show because your 8-year-old sister thought it looked neat over a decade ago. If more was always more, Husk would be the greatest character design in history, but we don't live in that world. Instead, we live in a world where John Faith, in all his pixelated glory, has more effective character design because at least that one is easy to read. He's a little blue dude with a simple white pixel to represent a clerical collar, so you know he's a priest, and that's all you need to know about him. That is how simple you can be and still have an effective character design that makes sense for your world and communicates everything you need with your audience. Is this little guy objectively more interesting to look at than Husk? No, but this little guy is objectively easier to read, and clarity is more important than appeal at the end of the day. Imagine your character design like a greeting card. Sure, sometimes adding glitter to a card can be fun, but if you add so much glitter that you completely cover up the message in the card, it kind of loses its function once you hand it over to another person. Sure, you know what it was supposed to say, and it definitely is very pretty with all that glitter, but they can't read it. A very important skill to learn in character design is when to stop, because you can have too much glitter. The following section is, admittedly, entirely born out of a petty disagreement that I definitely kind of instigated, but it is still in this video because I do think it's a worthwhile discussion to have. So, recently, I made it known that I really do not like the design of Ellen Jo from Zenless Zone Zero, though I did this in my most recent Art Tropes video. She was an example I threw up among a bunch of other examples, so I didn't spend time actually explaining why I think the design is such a mess. People jumped to defend her anyway, however. Plenty of people were perfectly reasonable, others were less so, but I did see the same defense over and over. You clearly did not do enough research, because you need to know about the game and the faction she's from in order to understand her design. This is a sentiment I've seen in other places where you can't judge a character design if you don't know about the world it comes from. I do understand why people would say this and think this, and I actually agree to a certain extent. After all, you're meant to consume and experience character designs in the context of a larger world and a larger cast, and that context will inform how you interpret the character. That being said, I think it is important to ask, is it okay for a character design to not be readable if you divorce it from all context? Yes and no. I'm going to bring up Team Avatar as an example here. They aren't really an internet or internet-adjacent design, per se, but I am currently in the midst of my semi-annual Atla rewatch, and I want an excuse to talk about these guys, so just please let me. Also, the designs do a good job demonstrating what I'm gonna talk about, so if you look at all these character designs, yet know absolutely nothing about the world, its lore, the mechanics, etc., this group of characters might be a little confusing. Without prior knowledge of the Four Nations, for example, it wouldn't be immediately clear to a random guy off the street which element all of them is most likely to bend. You wouldn't know to wonder about that even, but considering how big of a deal it is for the characters, it's kind of sad that that's not something that might be immediately obvious. I also think it's worth pointing out that due to all of them clearly being from vastly different cultures, an outsider might not really understand what they have to do with each other, aside from Katara and Sokka, who clearly hail from the same place and also look like they could be related. I would offer that as a critique to these designs, in that they could definitely have a detail like a shape or color that makes all of them a little more unified, and therefore more easy to recognize as one group, but that could be a personal taste thing if I'm honest. Still, these designs are incredibly effective even without context. You can tell that all of these people hail from different cultures, and you can also get a little information about these cultures based on the colors and style of their clothing, especially if you recognize aspects of the real-world cultures that the different nations take inspiration from. On top of that, even without information about bending in the Four Nations, you can still make some well-educated guesses about things like occupation, lifestyle, and personality. Sure, the context will make a lot of that make more sense, but you can still pick up on things even without the context. Basically, what I'm getting at here is that it's okay for a design to raise a few questions that can't be answered without the context of other characters or world building, but you shouldn't be leaving me with mostly questions, and you shouldn't be confusing me either. Now that I finished that little tangent, let's get back to picking on Ellen Jo. Let me be very clear from the get that you are allowed to like Ellen Jo's design, and if it makes perfect sense to you, that's great. That doesn't invalidate my opinion, which is that Ellen Jo has a confusing design. I think that Ellen Jo suffers from being over-designed in that she has too many details to try and read and understand, and I'm not sure what the most important parts even are. More, unfortunately, is that all these different design elements seem like they kinda have nothing to do with each other, or her character, because despite what some may think, I did actually read up on her before I dared to slander her even in passing. She is supposedly a student who is constantly tired because she's always trying to bounce between class and her job as a maid. So I guess that explains the bored expression and the maid costume. She is also working as a sort of soldier or agent, hence why she has giant sharky scissors, and why you are able to send her on missions into dimensional rifts or whatever the hollow things are. Okay, I didn't read the wiki all the way. It was a lot of words, and I don't care enough to commit to that many words. But anyways, considering the fact that she's already busy and tired enough to randomly fall asleep sometimes, I'm not sure why she's also going along with these missions, especially while she's still in her maid costume, other than because the people who made her thought it looked nice, which you may recall me thinking was bad character design and complaining about for several minutes when I brought her up on the channel before. The worst part to me, however, is the shark stuff. It is a seemingly random gimmick that is just there because Battle Maid wasn't interesting enough for the designers. In order to be fair, however, I'm gonna take into account the context of the world to try and help me understand the shark stuff's narrative. My research has gleaned that Therans, or animal people, are a thing in this world, and therefore some people just have animal tails or ears or more. The lack of any clear rules for how these guys work is another problem entirely that I do not want to get into, but takeaway, asking why she has a shark tail is more like asking why an elf would have pointy ears. With that background, I can see why it annoyed people when I asked that very question. She has a shark tail because she is a shark gal. Doy. The difference between this shark gal and an elf, though, is that knowing a character as an elf usually informs me better about this character. In pretty much any elf-having media that I've interacted with, elves have a distinct culture or specific attributes that you can read into upon discovering an elf character. You can make some assumptions about background, lifestyle, ability, even personality. This is not so easy with the Therans, as, from what I can tell, they are basically just regular people that just so happen to have weird shit glued to them. And they're also a bit stronger than normal. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I must point out that holding me to the standard of scraping through a fan wiki for an hour just to understand why your waifu looks like that is a bit ridiculous and is indicative of my point much more than yours. Anyways, the reason I consider that to be an issue is that she could have just as easily been a dog person, or a bear person, or a bat person, and it wouldn't actually change the character on a fundamental level. Actually, all of those critters would feel much more in line with her sleepy girl persona, as dogs, bears, and cats are all more or less known for being sleepy. Sharks, on the other hand, fun fact, literally cannot stop swimming, ever, because their gills only work if water is being pushed over them. I would associate a sharky character, therefore, with high energy, not low energy, and those associations do matter when you use fucking animal motifs, because animal motifs are some of the most universal concepts that often transcend culture. That being said, there is one bit of context that I had not previously considered that a few commenters brought up, and that is her faction theme. I thought that she was just part of a maid company, and she is, but all the members of the maid company have some kind of relation or reference to Western horror media. Ellen Jo, for her part, is likely a reference to famous killer sharks, like in Jaws. That is actually a pretty cool little concept, even if there were definitely some creatures that could be more easily associated with the sleepy character, and I also still don't know what that has to do with these characters specifically, but unfortunately, I already knew she was part of the maid company. I had seen a picture of them all together. I simply did not know that this other theme existed. I think you can see where this is going. Congratulations, Ellen Jo Defenders. She is officially not the worst maid fighter design I've seen in my life, and she is also probably the second most readable design of her faction. I want you to honestly tell me what you think these two characters are supposed to be references to, because I had to read the wiki pages to understand. Please put it in the comments now if you don't already know, because I want to see if I'm just stupid or not. If you want to look it up for yourself and see if you're right, be my guest. Read the fan wiki about Victoria Housekeeping Co., but I've officially seen and talked enough about this gacha game that I will never play. What I've been trying to get at here under all the petty is just that context can only take you so far, and good context won't save a bad or confusing design. Context that doesn't really do anything in the clarity department certainly won't. Your job as a creator is to help your audience understand what they're looking at. Leaving them with questions for a while isn't an awful thing to do, and sometimes you're gonna have to leave them with questions for the sake of your story. But the more the questions stack up, the less that your audience is gonna be able to follow. If the vast majority of your design is illegible without a thorough understanding of your world building, it might be time to reconsider how you went about it. I think I've complained enough for now. I hope that it ended up being helpful for someone out there. I definitely don't want to scare people away from character design, which is kind of what I feel like criticism-heavy things can end up doing. It's why I tried to give positive examples and talk about stuff that I like too, but I guess I will see once this video goes out if that works. Speaking of, I would love to hear your thoughts, both on this video and about character design in general, so don't forget to leave a comment. Do you have some advice that you might want to pass along to other viewers, or perhaps a different perspective to share? Maybe something you want advice on, even. I do still try to read and reply to comments. Not as much as I did when my channel was smaller, but, you know. Thank you for sticking around with me to the end. Extra special thanks to my channel members, who you can see on screen now. They go above and beyond to support me and this channel, and it's very appreciated, so they get to be a part of my videos. Look at them scroll on by. Look how cool they are. Wow, 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 wow. Anyway, I've done my yapping for the day. Not sure exactly what my next video is gonna be yet, because I have a couple ideas that I can get done by next Thursday, but feel free to watch my other stuff if you haven't already, and if you need some more of me to tide you over. I'll let you go now, though. Remember to drink water, get in a little exercise if you can, and most importantly, remember that you matter. Bye! Bye! Woo! You think that, like, I sound like okay, so, like, in Jujutsu Kaisen, the curses, they go, is that, that's how they sound, right?